Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Retro Muscle. Today we're going to go back to the audio tapes and play an interview that I found between T.C. Luoma, who is actually the editor-in-chief over at Muscle Media 2000, or should I say was, and it's with Keith Klein, who is actually a well-known nutritionist in the bodybuilding world, but he's probably most known for working with Lee Labrada. All right, let's get right to it. Let's play this thing.
From Golden, Colorado, in the foothills of the beautiful Rocky Mountains, comes Muscle Media 2000. T.C. Luoma, editor-in-chief of the magazine, seeks out the people and the subjects you find in Muscle Media 2000's audio tape series. At the end of this tape, we'll tell you how to reach Muscle Media 2000. Now, though, let's get on with it. Here's your host, T.C.
Hi, this is the next installment in the Muscle Media 2000 audio tape series, and this is T.C. Luoma filling in for Bill Phillips. This time, we're going to be talking to Keith Klein. Keith is a nutritionist for many top bodybuilders and athletes, and he's also a columnist for Muscle Media 2000. Say, Keith, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I've been in the nutrition field for about 15 years, and I graduated from Northwestern Michigan College back in 1980. And after that, what I basically did is I was actually in pre-med when I was in college. Headed from there, came to Houston to go to Texas Chiropractic College, which is what I had originally set out to do. But when I got down here, I became involved with a vitamin company and started managing a group of vitamin stores here in Houston. And as I was doing that, my love for nutrition really grew from that. And I was trained in clinical nutrition at the Institute of Specialized Medicine here in Houston. And I was there for about 5 years. And after being at the Institute of Specialized Medicine, I moved on to work with psychiatrist Dr. John Sims. And there we did basically eating disorders. And what's interesting about that time in my life is that's when I developed the philosophies which I currently and continue to write on the psychology of eating management. And from there, I did that for about 3 or 4 years. I went from there to the Houston Sports Medicine Clinic, and in conjunction with Dr. Ron Preston, who is a very well-known sports medicine physician here in Houston and all throughout Texas, went to work with him, and together we opened Texas Nutrition Clinic. And it was there that I began working with so many of America's top athletes. And from there, Dr. Preston died about 4 years ago. And when he died, I moved my current practice to where it is now here on Woodway in Houston.
Why don't you tell us some of the athletes you work with?
Well, it's pretty wide-ranging. If you look at a lot of your magazines and you open them up, I can tell you I work with a lot of the Hugo Boss models. I work with Lee Labrada, John Sherman. I work with Craig Titus, Stoney Grimes. I do a lot of the female athletes, like I work with Carla Dunlap for the most recent 90 tour, her comeback tour. I also work with people like Ricky Sanders of the Washington Redskins. I do some of the Gladiators, if you ever watch them. Jazz, Victoria, I do her. I also do Mary Lou Redden. I do a lot of our Olympic athletes, Mary Anali, who's an Olympic sprinter. I do golf pros. It's a pretty long list, actually. In fact, I do people like Miss America, Miss Texas, Miss USA. And so it's a pretty fine, wide-reaching grasp of athletic people that I get to work with.
Now, let's take Lee Labrada, for instance. He's presumably expert in bodybuilding and, all around pretty bright guy. Now, why would he need a nutritionist, or for that matter, any other pros that you work with?
Well, what I do for athletes is so different and so unique that I think they would have a very hard time being able to, peak on their own as well if they tried to do it on their own. Because, see, I get to be their objective eye. I'm a competitive bodybuilder. So, number one, I'm an athlete. So I can be their objective eye, and I'm not a yes man. So I'm not the kind of person that a lot of these people have around them that say, oh, you look great. I will look at them and say the truth, and I'll tell them what we need to change. So first of all, they get a perspective that they're often unable to get from those that are closest to them. Second of all, I'm going to monitor the athletes and take a body composition every 2 weeks. And this gives us more or less a microscopic viewpoint of how their body's changing. When an athlete works on their own, they're going to jump up on a scale, and it may show they lost 2 pounds. But in fact, they don't know whether that 2 pounds was lean body mass, fat, or what. And see, by my being able to monitor them, if we see a loss of muscle, I can immediately manipulate the diet to put it back on. Or in the case of a long-distance runner, as their performance, a lot of times they don't really know what's happening because they're in the midst, let's say, of their particular regime, and they can't be as objective as I can. And so a lot of these people use me. Lee and I have been working together for a number of years, and he continues to see me every 2 weeks, just like Stoney Grimes, just like John Sherman and Craig Titus. They see me every 2 weeks leading up to their show because that monitoring process takes an awful lot of energy off their mind. In other words, they don't have to worry about what to eat. I will outline exactly how much and what to eat, and I'll also explain some changes that we may need to make. And also, it gives them the opportunity to kind of, both of us get to bounce ideas off of each other.
Well, I don't want you to criticize these guys, but what possibly could they have been doing wrong that you corrected? I mean, obviously, they were doing pretty well before they met you. Obviously, I mean, Lee Labrada looks great lately. But what have you done, I mean, if anything, to change his way he was eating?
Well, basically, in the peaking process, there's a lot of complexities that are involved. And when you go to one show, well, let's use Lee, for example. Lee is one of the more intelligent, well, they're all intelligent, but Lee is highly intellectual about thinking about what he's doing, examining what he's doing, and he will come to me, and sometimes he will find that what he's doing isn't working well, or it's just not producing the results he'd expect. So this gives me an opportunity to explain why I think what's happening is happening. For example, I'm going to use one athlete in particular. Just recently, we got him ready for a Masters contest. This individual was using Molly McButter pretty heavily, and we don't mind if the sodium content in a person's diet is fairly high. Now, this individual, when he came in at this particular point, I said, I need you to cut out your Molly McButter, and I did not realize, nor did he ever tell me, he was eating a half of a bottle of Molly McButter at one time.
No.
Okay? Now, here we are a couple days before his show, and it looks as though he has elephantitis. All right?
Yeah.
Suddenly his ankles swell up so much. Now, when we start conversing, I can ask him some probing questions as to what did we do differently, what's going on, what did he do differently, and finally it came down to discovering the fact that he was using so much Molly McButter. Well, see, he would not have known how to correct that. And my deal was to say, now we need to put the Molly McButter back in. In spite of the fact we were 2 days before his show, we put it back in, but at a quarter of a bottle instead of a half. And by the time that show came, he not only peaked beautifully, he won.
Okay, I see.
And the water came off. So see, a good example of Lee is if he's having a problem, he can immediately pick up the phone and call me, and we can discuss it, and we are more apt to discover two minds are better than one.
Okay.
And you know what I admire about Lee is the fact that not only does Lee give me credit for helping him, Lee does a lot on his own. You know, so I want to give him credit for saying this guy really knows what he's doing. But I think anybody that's on that level that thinks they know it all is probably selling themselves short when they can include other people in it that have an equal level of intelligence and maybe some area of knowledge which they don't possess. And so I can provide him with certain clues and things that may help him. And so it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off of somebody when you're not certain that what you're doing is going to work.
Okay. Well, forgive my stupidity, but before we get into some of your theories, how does a nutritionist differ from, say, a registered dietitian?
Well, there's a big difference in the fact that a registered dietitian, first of all, has the ability to do internal feedings. They can do things within hospital settings. So they can walk into the hospital, and they are going to be more technically well-versed in hospital type of technologies. On the other hand, a nutritionist, and my area of expertise, keep in mind, is not only in eating management, but primarily sports nutrition. And so I would have to say that while the RD has a lot of expertise in the hospital side of things, they don't have the level of expertise that, let's say, I may have in the sports arena. So we may differ in the sense that I could never walk into the hospital and sit down and do internal feedings all day long, but then again, they would have a very hard time walking into the clinical setting and peaking various different athletes for shows like I do. So that's our main difference. They have more schooling, and you got to keep in mind, when I graduated 15 years ago, they didn't have any really good, well-renowned sports nutrition type programs that you could really go through. So I'd say our main difference is A, in the schooling, and B, in the ability to walk into a hospital and do internal feedings and whatnot.
Okay. Now, I attended one of your lectures once, and you told people that they could change their physiques largely by altering their proportions of food.
Yeah.
And could you go through that again for us?
Yeah. Well, I have a theory, and I've been working on this for a number of years, and we have lots, and you saw the before and after pictures that we use.
Right.
And those individuals, the only thing we did to change their physique so dramatically was we focused on food. And while a lot of people are so busy focusing in on supplements, looking for that elusive supplement that's going to help them change their body radically, and I'm talking about vitamins and minerals, there's really so much more they could do if they understood how to balance their food and meals better. For example, the first thing most athletes, and we'll use bodybuilders, I could use any athlete, but let's use bodybuilders. The first biggest mistake most bodybuilders make is they think 4 meals is good enough. And anybody out there that wants to build muscle that doesn't eat 6 times a day is completely off base. They will never see the kind of results that they can get if they eat 6 times versus 4. And yet too many people rely on 3 or 4 meals and think they're doing great.
Well, what constitutes a meal?
Well, a meal has to have the balance of a complex carbohydrate with a protein. Those two things together are extremely important to being able to balance or keep the blood sugar more balanced. Here's the deal. If an individual, let's say, for example, you have a particular ratio of foods that we know works best for various athletic endeavors. I would be an idiot to think a long-distance runner should eat like a bodybuilder, TC. If I fueled them the same way, they could not perform in their respective sports. So we know that each athlete requires a different balance of fuel. For bodybuilding, we often hear the ratio of 60-30-10. And what most athletes fail to understand is that each meal has to have that balance, and that no meal should be bigger than another, and that each meal should be spread out evenly through the day. And when you put those things into place, it's amazing how well the body can handle the fuel, utilize the fuel, and create the type of gains that we'd like to see. So really, when a person puts into place frequent meals 6 times a day, 60-30-10 at each meal, each one having caloric values that are the same, they will often see tremendous changes in their physique. But see, it's the body composition that I do on people that tells me how many calories should be used.
Okay. What's your personal opinion? Like, a lot of the people in the field think that the ratio should be different. You should be getting a lot more protein. For instance, Dr. Connolly says that.
Yeah, and I do change the protein content while the contest is nearing. So as a contest nears, the protein content goes up to more like 40%, and the carbs drop down to 50%. Now, I do not believe that excessive quantities of protein would benefit you any more than, say, excessive quantities of carbohydrates. When some people ascribe to saying that, let's say we need, 50% or 60% protein, I don't believe that. And I believe that too much protein would be converted to fat, and therefore the person wouldn't see the proper results either. Mm-hmm. So when they say, there's a certain level of protein that the body needs, but once you go beyond it, putting more in it isn't going to be beneficial.
Okay, is there a limit to how much protein the body can assimilate in a given setting, as far as you?
Well, yeah, it depends on the person's body weight, genetics, and so that's largely determined by the results that we see after the first few weeks working with a client. So let's suppose, for example, yesterday I had a gentleman in, Tony Norris. He's ranked 3rd in the world in Taekwondo, but he's also a wrestler, and he weighs 293 pounds. He's 11% body fat. This individual I'm going to take up to 330 pounds, and we're going to keep his percentage of body fat at 11%. Because of his excessive amount of lean body mass, which is somewhere in the range of 270 pounds, this guy needs to eat 3 chicken breasts at every meal, all right? that would be way too much for a person who weighs 180 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it depends largely on how much lean body mass the individual has, and that's kind of what we base it on.
Before we go any further, why does this guy want to be 330 pounds for the wrestling?
Well, because he believes he'll break into the pro wrestling ranks if he weighs that amount.
My God.
He's huge. He's one of the biggest guys I've ever seen, and I've worked with some big ones.
Yeah, how tall is he?
He's about 6'3".
Okay, yeah, he's a big guy. Huh?
He's real big.
Right.
Yeah.
And give me an example. Okay, this ratio, this 60-30-10. Let's say I want to want to have my second meal at 10 in the morning. I mean, what kind of things do you suggest I eat? I mean, offhand, it's difficult for me to think of what I can go into the kitchen and rapidly prepare that has those ratios.
Yeah, what we have to do is we have to make sure that you had some kind of low-fat protein. So the first thing that I would say is you could choose from chicken breast, turkey breast, fish, and it cannot be of a lunch meat variety. A lot of people who think they're eating low-fat lunch meats are completely mistaken, and not only that, they get an enormous amount of sodium, and on top of that, they get a very low grade of amino acids from lunch meats. So it has to be natural, wholesome foods that we could cook. Chicken breast, turkey breast, fish, shrimp, or scallops. Egg whites is a great source, too. So, for example, for UTC, you would need to eat 1 to 2 chicken breasts there, along with about a 10-ounce potato or yam. And then if you wanted to throw in a cup of vegetables or so, that would work too. But you'd need to do that literally, all throughout the day, every few hours.
Now, the logistics of this are pretty tough. How do you do this personally? Do you prepare your foods the night before or something?
Yeah, I cook, prepare, and carry all my own food. In fact, that's how all my clients do it. The nice thing, and keep in mind as we speak, and you know this, I'm not associated with metrics, but the nice thing in what's happened with metrics, and they can talk all they want about the partitioning agents that are within it, the substrates or whatever, the fact is that metrics seems to make this whole ordeal a little easier. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if you drink a metrics with a baked potato, you just ate 60-30-10. You just ate that balance. And that's why I believe that people tend to get the results they do, is because that particular product just fit the components that we just discussed that are necessary to have optimal utilization of food.
That's funny.
Also, each meal would be evenly balanced.
It's funny you should say that. I just had a potato and metrics just before I called you.
Yeah, you could have done that too. But you got to make sure, I really am a big believer in eating foods and eating natural foods, because you got to remember, I've been doing this for years, and I've seen the dramatic transformations in people's physiques just through food alone. While we do, recommend metrics to people that just don't have the time to cook, I'm just a big believer in food.
Mm-hmm.
There's other constituents in food that also help us. There's chemicals within vegetables oftentimes that we can't get through other supplemental forms. So I'm a big believer in the food.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of sort of, obviously it'd be better if we had pictures, but before and after type scenarios of people, the things they accomplished body fat wise using this new this 6 meal a day?
It ranges so dramatically. We have taken people that were virtually obese. In fact, I do the super obese. We have one gentleman who was 470 pounds that now weighs 192.
Whoa.
I've taken a woman 377 pounds that now weighs 185. I've taken many, many average people. Like, for example, do you remember on the cruise Steve Langham? Steve Langham was the 50-year-old guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was in phenomenal shape, but yet if you had seen him when he and I met a year before, he didn't even look like he lifted weights.
Wow.
Today he walks around, he's 51 years old, and he wins all the master bodybuilding contests that he enters.
Amazing.
So we've seen some real dramatic results. The percentages of fat vary so much because we've taken people, in fact, today, just as an example, one individual that I saw has dropped 11% body fat just since we started seeing each other, and it's only been 3 months. So it's just been a really dramatic change for him.
And as far as you know, this is just because he changed his eating and not because of any drugs or anything like that?
Correct. Now, in fact, in my office, I have literally thousands of pictures that these people submit to me. They're before and after pictures, and I often point out, because the changes are so dramatic, I think the first thing people think when they look at the pictures is they think steroids automatically. But I point out that if these people use steroids, and some of them did, they would have used them before they ever came to see me. And why didn't they look like this sooner? And I've seen people, and maybe you've seen people in the gym that take all the steroids they want, and they still look the same 10 years later, and they haven't changed at all. And fundamentally, it's because they don't understand the importance of how the role the diet plays in creating the look they want. I've even taken people, by the way, that often do not look like they have the genetics to do well, and they've gone out and won bodybuilding shows. And I'd be honest with you, when we first look at them, I would have thought, geez, there's no way this person's going to win. So that when a person's body changes like this, it's a great testimony for eating this particular way.
Okay. Now, let's say, I weigh about 200. Let's say I want to get to 215 or 220. Well, how many calories per sitting should I be ingesting?
Well, here's how it would have to work first. I do things in phases, TC. So the way I would do it first is I would start with you on phase 1, and you say you're 200, right?
Right.
And you want to be 220.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're 200 and you want to be 220, where I would start with you is on 6 meals a day. I would start at 3,600 calories. I would take the 3,600 calories and I'd divide it by 6, and I would make sure that each meal had 600 calories and that each meal was sort of very close to that 60-30-10 balance. I would start there for 2 to 3 weeks, and then I would see what change transpired, and at the end of that 2 to 3 weeks, I would again bump up the calories or whatever based on what I'd seen happen. So based on the response from the body composition, then I would probably go ahead and add in another 500 calories spread out evenly between the meals, but I would have bumped up the protein. And then the second time that we meet, or the third time that we meet, if I had to bump up the calories, I would have bumped up the carbohydrates.
Okay.
So eventually probably moving you up somewhere around 4,000 calories a day spread evenly out and all the meals balanced. And then I think you would see that just over the course of time, you'd naturally be up to about 215 pretty quickly.
Now, let's say the opposite. Let's say I wanted to go to 180 for some reason. What would I do then?
Well, if you wanted to be 180 and you're 200, and it sounds to me, I don't know what your percentage of fat is, then what I would do is I would actually go on and start you on somewhere around 2,800 calories. And I would divide each meal by 6, so that if I had a 2,800 calorie diet, I would have you on about 450 calories a meal, every meal spread 3 hours apart. And I would monitor you to make sure that your lean body mass stayed the same, and then depending on how much you changed and how much you lost, it would determine whether I bumped up the calories or decreased them a little bit more.
Okay, so it's moderate calorie restriction then.
None of my clients ever diet on a hypocalorie diet.
Okay, well, tell me about dieting. What mistakes do dieters usually make?
Well, the biggest thing I see them make is, number one, they skip meals, and number two, we see them often forget about the balance. Let me describe a meal pattern, a typical meal pattern on an average person that they think is great. They wake up and they have a bowl of oatmeal. They have fruit in the mid-morning. They eat a salad or a baked potato at lunch. They eat frozen yogurt in the mid-afternoon. And then they eat a chicken breast and baked potato and vegetables for dinner. And they think that's great. And they think they're dieting, and they think just because they're eating low fat, they're going to lose weight. And most of the eating management people that I counsel, that eat that way, end up oftentimes not only not losing weight, sometimes they're even gaining weight on that kind of program, because if you notice, each one of those meals I mentioned, except the dinner, they were completely unbalanced, loaded heavily in carbohydrates and very low in protein. So you see, the first thing that I would have done is balanced out that person's diet. The other thing we see people do is they have a tendency to think that in order to be lean, they have to eat perfectly, and I think that's a big mistake. So if you're not getting ready for a contest and you're just doing this as a lifestyle, I believe the goal is perfection is not the goal, progress is. So, I encourage my clients to understand how to make a series of better bad choices, and I try to make it a lifestyle. And now remember, what I described to you in the beginning was the athletic dietetic program I do. And what I'm discussing with you now is the eating management program, which differs quite a bit. You've got the athletic mentality that says, hey, Keith, just tell me what to eat, man, and I'm going to eat it. But then you have the eating management client where you have to really work and make things fit their lifestyle. And so we have to make sure, again, we're using natural, wholesome foods, but we have to fit things in that's simplistic, easy, and easy to work with.
Okay. I remember you mentioning the yo-yo syndrome about dieters. I mean, we've all heard of that, but what exactly does that mean?
Well, most people just think of the yo-yo as being something where you just lose weight and then you gain back more than you lost. But my perspective on it, the way I teach it, is to show people how for every 10 pounds a person loses when they diet too strictly, between 4 to 6 of it can come from muscle. So we know that if a person diets too strictly, they don't lose pure fat, but rather they lose a combination of muscle and fat. So let's take a woman who's 120 pounds, and let's say she's 25% fat. Now, her body composition is such that she's got 30 pounds of fat on her body, 90 pounds of lean body mass, and let's just say she looks great. Now, if she gains 20 pounds, she's going to go up to 140, and her percentage of fat isn't going to be 25 anymore. It's now 35. So what she thinks is going to work is she's going to skip meals and she's going to diet real strictly, and let's just say she eats under 1,000 calories a day. Well, what's going to happen is the 20 pounds she's about to lose, it wouldn't be the same 20 pounds she just gained. You see, since she's about to diet so strictly, part of her weight's going to come from muscle and part of it's going to come from fat. Well, now, when she goes back down to 120, she's no longer 25% body fat, she's 32%. See, the process of dieting, when you get caught up in the yo-yo cycle, is that it alters your body composition, and the end result is that it changes your metabolism. You see, if she has less muscle, after 8 years of dieting on that kind of diet, up and down, at a body weight of 120, 8 years later, she'd have 40% body fat, not 25. And see, two focal points here are this. Number one, because she's lost so much muscle over the course of time, her metabolic rate would have slowed down. And now if she ate the same number of calories she used to, she'll gain 10 pounds a year every year thereafter, just by eating the same amount of food.
That's amazing.
Yeah, you know what I want to comment on that, though, TC? People are under the misconception that if she had just exercised, she wouldn't have lost muscle, and that's completely a myth. Because if she wasn't taking in enough calories to sustain herself as it was, and she was exercising and expending even more energy, her body would have had to have either A, slowed down the metabolic rate, and B, pulled out more muscle because it's so nutrient dense to give her the fuel to keep going. So she would have actually lost more muscle if she exercised.
So moderate calorie restriction with exercise.
That's the only way to do it.
What kind of exercise component would you recommend for just plain weight loss?
Well, I recommend, depending on where they're at, like the very obese, we start off just with aerobic activity, brisk walking, something mild that we can build up to, and something where they don't feel like they're going to fail, you know? If we put them on, go into the gym where they're feeling very self-conscious about their body as it is, it's not going to work well. So depending on how heavy one is, I would start with an aerobic component first. And depending on their goal, let's say a woman has 15 pounds to lose and she's not working out, I'd start her on an aerobic component, and in about 2 to 3 months move her into a weight training component along with the aerobics. I believe the aerobics and the weights are very important to have together.
All right, guys, we're going to stop it right there for now. I really hope you guys enjoyed what you heard. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel. Part 2 will be coming out next week, so stay tuned.